When running games of D&D and other TTRPGs in the last few months, for a lot of sessions I've done zero prep. Instead, I've taken a leap of faith, as well as a leaf out of one of Stephen King's many books. In his autobiography On Writing, he says, "My basic belief about the making of stories is that they pretty much make themselves. The job of the writer is to give them a place to grow." Can we really bring advice that's meant for novelists with editors to our game tables? Will our games be any good if we don't have a plan? And will our players notice a difference? My name's Rich, this is Renegade Rolls, and let's be storytellers, with or without any prep time, together with our friends. One day, I'm going to get a sign printed, and it's going to have this little disclaimer on it. There are a million ways to play TTRPGs, and if you and your players are all having fun, then that's great. But if you're like me up until a few months ago, you might not be having as much fun as you'd hoped. Here's my story, my leap of faith. When I started running games of D&D and other TTRPGs, I was a classic over-preparer. I wrote descriptions, read aloud text full of lovely, loquacious lexicon, and I had everything laid out beautifully, just waiting for my players to discover the intricate stories I'd set up for them. But I found myself getting stressed before sessions, which is annoying because I love this hobby. Had I planned enough? Was I being evocative in setting the scene? Was my baddie's monologue clever enough? Was the twist suitably twisty? Would my players actually follow the hooks I'd laid out for them or go somewhere different entirely? There had to be an easier way. But the trouble is, running a game without prep is scary. It's like riding a bike without stabilizers. It's giving a presentation at work when your PowerPoint breaks. In the past, being underprepared for a game was genuinely one of my worst nightmares. So how did I get over it? What's the mindset I discovered in order to run a successful no-prep game? Did I picture my players naked? Well, no, that would not have helped. It would have only made things worse. There is some great advice already out there on the practicalities of how to set yourself up for success with a no-prep game, so I won't repeat it here. My recommendation, though, is that Knigobi just released an excellent video all about it. Once you're already in the headspace of being ready to run something improvised, you'll be able to use Knigobi's advice to the fullest. But for me, it was a long and windy psychological road to get to that mental place to begin with. Everyone's brain is different, and that's a wonderful thing. So all I can do is tell you what worked for me and how you can try these things to see if they work for you as well. The change that most helped me to take that leap of faith came thanks to taking improv classes. If you're in a position to take classes, I'd highly recommend it, but if not, there's a huge amount we as game masters can take from the improv way of thinking. The philosophy there is that because it's all made up on the spot, there's no way that any part of the performance will be repeated. Everything happens once and it's gone. Then you're immediately on to the next thing. That feeling, while initially terrifying, was so liberating for me. It's not that nothing I said mattered, it's that nothing I said was wrong. Prepping my games gave me ample opportunities to second-guess myself and procrastinate, finding the perfect solution. But the worst thing to do in an improv show, even worse than silence for a moment, is to plan more than a line or so ahead. I've got to be reactive to whatever's around me and be willing to abandon ideas and run with new ones on the fly. If I couple this with being proactive in sharing ideas as they occur to me, well, that's a brave new world. And so I began to take that attitude to my tables. Without a plan, I suddenly had that same fight or flight energy as being up on stage. There was no way I could do anything less than pay total attention, as I had no safety net. I realised that when it's fully engaged, my brain in the moment can come up with all sorts of things. That yes, I can be quick enough to think up ideas on the spot, and awkward silences are actually super rare. These ideas are no less valid because they happened at the table than if I came up with them beforehand, and they're better suited to the moment and situation than anything that I might have pre-planned. At first, I tried it for just a scene or two. I deliberately left gaps in my usually excellent notes. After a while, I dropped in more of those unplanned elements until eventually I was joining up those panicked, flying by the seat of my pants moments so that it became my whole game session. Running a completely improvised game takes a lot of energy. Being in that focused state of mind for a sustained period is tiring, and I have felt drained afterwards. But every time, I know it's worth it. An uplifting, inspiring story is not the same as concrete advice. Here we go. Tip number 1. This is not for the faint-hearted or for first-timers. If it's your first time running a game, plan as much as you have time for, but then notice the moments where your plan breaks down, where your players go left instead of right. That's where you're improvising. Tip number 2. When you're doing this for the first time, make sure that you are around people you know to be kind, and tell them in advance. Good people will be supportive and help you out as much as they can. Tip number 3. Starting a game is the trickiest bit. For your players to be able to engage with the world, you'll need to give them something in addition to whatever is on their character sheet. For this, you'll want to do a super quick bit of world building, helping everyone get their head in the same space as you. It's a medieval fantasy world where the birds have gone. It's a cyberpunk near future where your value to the corporate society is measured by your faith. It's a primordial setting where the world is new and fresh and there's magic everywhere. I came up with each of those ideas in about 10 seconds each. For you at your table, you'll probably go into the game session with something like that in mind. Those were the macro, wide world building. The second part of this world building is to do it for a tiny little scale around our characters as the adventure begins. In that fantasy world where the birds have gone, the characters are just coming out of a temple with eagle insignia all over the place. It was a failed dungeon crawl, but they've made it out with their lives. What happens next? In the cyberpunk setting, the characters are in their safe house when they hear a knock at the door from the crypto papacy. In the primordial setting, the characters have all been drawn inextricably towards a stone, which sings to them. The secret here is it's okay not to know what's going to happen next. Your players will have ideas, and in the course of explaining this to them, chances are your brain is going to come up with some interesting ideas. But this does bring us on to tip number 4. If you have the kind of players who are kind of sitting back, waiting to be entertained, you'll struggle with this. It works best when it's collaborative, when everyone is jumping in together. And if you do have those players who are waiting for you to tell them the story, it's worth having a word. Tip number 5, stalling tactics. There's a very good chance your players will ask you a question that you have no clue how to answer in the moment. What ho, barkeep? Tell me all the wines and ales you have on sale here. GM brain goes, ah. But the character that I'm inventing on the fly as the barman here, he can go, well, I've got all sorts of things. You need a bit more specific than that. I'd be here all day if I was to list stuff to you. But the things I'd recommend, if you're feeling fruity, it would be the elderflower wine. But also, if you're feeling a bit spicy, you've got some Black Dragon rum in the basement. Only for special occasions. Only if you know what you're doing. How's that sound? And you've saved yourself listing so many little details. The technique I'm using here is to repeat part of the question, describe the situation a bit more widely, and while I'm doing that, the brain's spinning, thinking up a couple of new things. Tip number 6. Listen super hard to your players and their character stories. If you watch Matt Mercer or Brennan Lee Mulligan, they are so intent on what their players say, so that they can weave it back into the story. They've already got nice worlds already prepped, but whatever they've planned, that can change instantly because they are listening so closely. This comes back to paying your full attention to your players and leads us nicely on to tip number 7. Giving full attention is tiring. Give yourself more breaks than you think you need, which also allow you to catch up as well. You can also use these extra breaks at the table to check in with your players, ask them how they're doing, and also check that they've understood some of the information that you've given them. Because in an improv game, I'm coming up with so much on the fly, I don't always repeat myself or make things as clear as I'd like to my players. And I've noticed this, so taking time to check in with them is so useful. Tip number 8 is to practice as much as you can outside of your game. The more that you're able to practice improvising, the more widely that you read, the more outside experiences that you get, the better your games will be. One thing that I love to practice, if any of my friends will tolerate me for long enough for this, is to practice monologuing. Ah, heroes. You've arrived at my castle at last. I would welcome you, but you've already broken so many things here. You really think that your heroic virtue, your oh, we're friends, the power of friendship, that will save you. You will cower before me. That was terrible, but improvised right now, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Tip number 9 is just to try it. Give it a go. If you're among friends, genuinely, what's the worst that can happen? If it's ridiculous, if it's silly, if you lose the plot, So what? You're among friends, having a nice time. A lot of the advice here runs sort of in parallel to the rest of the advice I give on this channel about how to be storytellers. The truth is, you can tell great, well-planned stories and you can tell great, unplanned stories. They'll be different, but they can both be glorious. If you've run a no prep game before, I'd love to hear about it. How did it go? Tell me about it in the comments. If this is your first time here, the focus of Renegade Rolls is to look at the storytelling aspects of TTRPGs. How can we be better storytellers in a crazy improvised game? This video here is my Game Master's guide on my overall philosophy for this and some of the videos that I plan on sharing in future. I'll see you there where we can be storytellers with some prep, or maybe not so much prep, together with our friends.